So, welcome to the second part of the weather ready landscapes and environment in your landscape. So, I'm Terry James. We're going to talk about the environment in your landscape tonight. So, tonight, what the learning objectives that I hope you get from this is that you're going to better understand the growing environment within your landscape, identify the problems in your landscape due to climate or environment effects, and then be able to describe the factors needed for good plant growth. The order that we're going to work this in is we're going to look at your landscape. We're going to look at the weather versus climate. Then we're going to look at light, temperature, and water in the environment in your landscape. So what do you consider in your landscape? I have a slew of words up here that I consider part of my landscape, things that I am usually always looking at that are going to affect my landscape in one way or the other, from light, temperature, and moisture to critters, disease, and insects. Your soil affects your landscape and your environment, latitude, altitude, nutrition, all of that's going to affect your landscape in one way or the other. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at your landscape. So this is the picture of a landscape. This is actually my landscape. This is actually a photo from Google Maps. This is looking obviously into my front yard. A few things have changed since this picture was taken. Some of the landscaping has changed. This was well before I moved into this house. But this is going to be the process that I want you guys to kind of be able to use so you can actually use this in your own landscape. I also went and looked at, this is what it was from the county assessor's office. So this is the shape of my property. And we're going to kind of look at and talk about base maps and site analysis. So almost the first step of landscape design, but we're going to actually be able to use this looking at our environment. So what I want you to do is look at this. This is a picture, again, from Google Maps. So I am looking at my landscape and I'm looking down on it. Google Maps is a very good tool to be able to use for some of this stuff. I drew the perimeter out in the yellow line of my landscape. It actually was able to tell me approximately how many square feet I have in that. And then these other boxes that I drew, the purple is kind of basically the landscape bed that I have in my backyard. That's pretty much mulched area and shrubs. Larger shrubs that are under some understory trees. And then the house is the green, and then the driveway is the blue. The one thing I did forget on this to grow or to draw on here was my deck, which is a pretty sizable deck. Takes up a little bit of room in my backyard, and I kind of forgot about that part. But you're able to draw this. You can subtract those landscape areas so you can figure out how much turf you have. So if you need to go in, it's a good tool to kind of help you figure out if you need how much fertilizer and stuff you would need to apply in your yard. So now we're at our first activity. You should have two handouts or one handout that is labeled Landscape Environment Hands-on Worksheet. So this is going to be able to walk you through doing this since we weren't able to do this live. But basically what I'm wanting you to do is create a site inventory of your landscape. This is going to be able to help you better understand the relationship between your landscape and the environment. We're going to look at these details, not limited to environmental conditions, plants, topography, drainage patterns, soil, existing buildings and structures, circulation, all those. So what I want you to do is use mine as an example, but then go and look up your landscape on Google Maps. I did give you a short YouTube video link to help you better create a base map on your landscape. This will actually walk you through and show you how to get into the site, and then actually how to do these drawings and add these layers and stuff. But just to show you, I kind of drew where my north arrow is. My house does not obviously sit square north and south, so I am sitting at a little bit of an angle. You can see some of the trees and stuff that are in my neighborhood. These circles around are Scotch pines that are large in my backyard that help shade the area. I do have one linden in my backyard also. And then I back up to a commons area in my subdivision. So just kind of some of the things that I started. So now what I want you to do is pause the recording, go ahead and kind of go into Google Maps or what have you and look at this, or we can, and then you can be able to follow along with your own landscape. So now that you can see what your landscape looks like and you can kind of think about some of the orientation of sun, wind, all those environmental conditions, we're going to think about what weather and climate are and do a little bit of definition of this. So climate is the average of the weather over time and space, or what you expect to be happening. So you expect it to be hot and humid and dry in July. You expect it to be cold and wintry and snowy in February. So that is the climate over a long time period, and kind of what you're going to expect in that time frame that you're looking at. The weather is the short-term conditions of the atmosphere, or what you're getting, what's outside your window right now. So whether or not you need to grab the umbrella or grab the snow boots or what have you. So those are the two things that we need to remember when we're looking at both weather and climate. There's macroclimate. That's going to describe areas on a large land scale. So kind of what happens in the upper Great Plains or the Midwest or whatever you want to call us. What happens in Nebraska from east to west, and what our macroclimate is. So that is what a macroclimate is, describing that climate on a larger land frame area. A microclimate is going to describe the specific growing environment for a plant. And normally you're going to be able to manipulate those microclimates sometimes, sometimes not, but a lot of times you can manipulate them for a specific plant to grow. As you can see here in this picture, this is a little mini high tunnel or mini low tunnel that we had created in a raised bed. So we're creating a microclimate to start carrots and radishes and lettuce a little bit earlier in the season. Microclimates can happen in multiple different ways, in multiple different locations. You have hilly areas, low areas, structures can create microclimates, water creates a microclimate, elevation, raised beds, plants, soil, that all is going to contribute to some microclimates. So as we talked about, we're going to look at light first. So what does light need to do in our environment, and what do plants need from light within our environment? So light actually does a lot for the plants. If you've guys gone through the morphology session, then a lot of this it will be review for you, but light is part of germination, growth habit, helps with fruiting, flowering, dormancy, hardiness, formation of storage organs, fall color, leaf drop, photosynthesis. So light is needed for a lot of what the plant needs in order for it to grow. So we're going to look at a couple things. We're going to look at light quality and light quantity. So first we're going to look at light quality. When you look at a plant, what you see is the color and the light spectrum that's reflecting off of that light spectrum. So all of the colors are being absorbed into that plant except for the green and the yellow. So this is the visible light spectrum. It's off of the wavelength in showing in meters. But what the plant really needs mostly are the two endpoints, so the blues and the reds. That's what most of the chemical reactions that plants need are done within those two endpoints. The green is reflected because that's usually not needed quite as much as the other two ends. Light quality management is mainly done in controlled environments. So when you're talking in greenhouses and stuff, as you can see from these couple examples that I have, it shows you that the different wavelengths are used in different parts of the growing parts of the plant. So red light stimulates photosynthesis. Blue light helps with compact plant structures and smaller leaf and thicker leaves. It helps open the stomata. So you can see as this tomato plant is growing in this bottom picture, what parts of that light spectrum is being used to create whatever is needed on that plant at that time as it's growing. So photoblastic seed germination, that's used by light. Light can stimulate or inhibit seed germination. So carrots need light in order to germinate. So does lettuce, a rubber plant, and zoysia grass. So when you sow those, you're always sowing them very lightly on the top of the soil or on top of the seed plat that you're growing them in, and not putting a lot of soil on top of it. Whereas tomatoes and lilies, they don't need the light to germinate. They can germinate just fine without any light needed. But remember, there are also other plants that need light germination or light stimulation to germinate. There are several weed seeds or wheat plants that we count as weeds that need germination or need light to germinate. And when you turn soil over, you're going to bring those seeds up. Therefore, you may have more weeds than you want. So just remember that. So light quantity, we're going to spend a lot of time at light quantity. It's measured in photons or light particles. You can measure this very simply. This is a meter that you can purchase online. This meter does both light, pH, and soil moisture. So if you're interested in light quantity and how much light you have in your yard, you can purchase this and measure your light quantity. Too much light may not be a good thing for some plants. As you can see, this is a pretty shady area. A lot of shade-loving plants are growing in this area. If you put sunflowers in here, they probably wouldn't be doing quite as well as these impatiens are doing in the shade. So we're going to look at light intensity. Light intensity is plants that vary in adaptation to the different quantities of light. As you saw in the first picture, that was the shady area, so that was a lot of impatiens and hostas and those kinds of things that really like shade. As you can see in this picture, these are vegetables, and most vegetables all grow in full sun and thrive in full sun. So you can see that the light intensity in this photo is going to be much greater than in the previous photo. Sudden changes in light intensity may cause the plant to have some issues. It can cause leaf drop or leaf scorch. How many of you have had a tree where you've had this gorgeous bed of hostas underneath it, or a still bee, and something happens to that tree and it comes down, and then you need to move those hostas because they're burning up in the sun. Light intensity also varies by the time of day and by the season. So there's such thing as what they call daylight integral, which is a DLI. Plants have an optimum light intensity and at that maximum growth. So we're looking at another shade area. These plants, their daylight integral is something that is a little bit lower. It doesn't need as much maximum light quantity. And that DLI is always measured, and it's the amount of light that falls within a 24-hour period. So one of the other things that you look at when you're looking at light quantity is the etolation and blanching of some plants. So that's the etolation is the response of plant to the light or light absence. As you can see in this bottom picture, we have two plants, one that has responded to light and one that is in response without light. So you can see the one that has light is growing much vigorously, has shorter internodes, much more green. The other one is elongated and spindly, doesn't have as much green, so it's not photosynthesizing like it should. So there's issues with the light quantity in that picture. We also look at blanching when you're looking at light quantity. So blanching is actually a trick that a lot of people do when they are wanting specific vegetables. Cauliflower is one of them. You want cauliflower with a head that is much more lighter. If you do not blanch that cauliflower head, the head is usually a little more yellow. So what you do is you wrap the leaves across the top of that cauliflower head and you blanch that. It helps promote a tenderer crop with a milder flavor. It keeps that tissue from photosynthesizing as it's blanching. Some of the other crops that we think of, vegetable crops we think of when you're thinking of blanching, some people blanch asparagus, so that white asparagus, and then leeks are another one that you always are kind of piling up the soil and stuff around the bottom to blanch that bottom part of the leeks. Excuse me. So the next thing we're going to look at when we're talking about light quantity is the photoperiod. This is the amount of time that the plant is exposed to sunlight. Plants respond differently when it comes to the amount of sun that the plant is exposed to. So most of the time, you look at short day, day neutral, and long day plants. So if you're looking at a short day, that means that the night is much longer, and this is uninterrupted time of darkness. And poinsettias and chrysanthemums are the two that we always think of as short day plants. Those plants we actually trick to manipulate them in the greenhouse to get them blooming earlier for sale in the retail stores. So usually starting them in June, July when our days are long. So you actually have to trick that plant and make that plant think that the days are shorter. Cucumbers and corn don't have any photoperiod to them, so any length of day is going to allow them to create their flower and then their fruit. And then two long day plants that need a lot of sunlight and shorter days to create their flowers are onions and spinach. Storage organ development also has a photoperiod influences. Short length is Jerusalem artichokes and potatoes. Long days are onions and garlic. We already talked about the onions. And then runners from the strawberry plant and the spider plant are affected by long days. They're also required, some of this is required for plants to go into dormancy or into fall color, and then to move into cold hardiness. So those lengths of light period or photo period affects your plants in that way too. Lighting and forced flowering is usually controlled in controlled environments, in a greenhouse or in commercial use. Really not in our backyard, but I kind of wanted you to kind of know it. Um, like we talked about the poinsettias and getting them ready for sale. Um, Growers are going to start those earlier in the season during the longer days, and then they're going to manipulate it. So they're going to put shade cloth or something over their greenhouse area to trick them into thinking it's a shorter day than it actually is. We do have light pollution within our area. Especially in urban environments. Pollution can definitely change the photo period of that plant. It's unwanted light that's going to interrupt that dark period. Because remember, I said it's uninterrupted dark, and that light is going to interrupt that, obviously. It can be managed in controlled environments, can't really be managed in more urban landscapes. One of the examples I have is we have a tree in our courtyard here. There is a photocell light right next to a tree that is on all night long. And in the fall, when that tree is supposed to start changing its photo period to go into a dormancy with its leaf color and stuff, one half of the tree that is right next to that light pod is as green can be, and literally the other half of the tree, you can actually draw a line down the center of the tree, and that side is red. So light pollution definitely in urban areas can be a problem to some plants when you're talking about your photo period. Phototropism is the bending of the plants to or away from lights. If you have positive, your plant is going to grow towards the light. Negative is going to grow away from the lights. Philodendron is one that definitely shows negative or positive phototropism in plants. Sunflowers are also another example that you see this. If you ever have driven by or have had sunflowers in your landscape, those flower heads move and track the sun throughout the day. So they're actually bending towards the light all the time. So it's a pretty cool example of what plants can do. Optimizing your light quantity. A lot of this is done in commercial settings, but there are a few things that you can do in your own backyard. Plant selection is one of them. Plant spacing and orientation is another one that we can do in our own landscape. When we're planting, we need to make sure that we are planting and orientating our plants in the right way. Making sure that we have maximum space in between the plants to get as much light as possible. The light, remember we said, is part of creating the fruit and flowering of that plant. When we're talking about vegetables in our garden, that's really what we're wanting. We're wanting to maximize that. Or if we have fruit trees or shrubs, if you have blueberries or raspberries or blackberries or fruit trees, definitely plant spacing is definitely something you need to look at. When we were looking at our site analysis map, one of the things when you're looking at putting something new in is to know how big that plant is eventually going to get. So, you know, if you have a shrub and that shrub is a 10 by 10 shrub, so it's going to be 10 foot wide by 10 foot tall, and you only put it 5 feet from the house, from the side of your house, then that plant's going to be growing into your house and you're not going to give it maximum orientation and maximum spacing. So definitely make sure that you know what the size of that plant is going to be and plant it correctly when you're starting it when it's small. Pruning is also another way to make sure that we have good light quantity within our landscape. Usually this is done for fruit trees or shrubs. The more light that you can get to penetrate into those areas, the better fruit production, the less diseases and issues that you're going to have. So definitely going in and pruning the interior spaces of your fruit trees is a very good thing to do. That allows all that light to penetrate in there and get you better production of your fruit. One thing also to look at when you're pruning is hedges. A lot of people, and I see this as I drive around very frequently, is that people are not pruning their hedges correctly. So if you think about it, a hedge has all those leaves on it, and the leaves go clear down to the soil, to the base, and those leaves are what needs is creating that photosynthesis, and that's what's making the food for that plant. Well, it needs light in order to create that photosynthesis. So if you are pruning them the incorrect way in this picture, so that it's more at a base, smaller at the ground, which is what I see a lot for improper pruning, you're actually creating the upper piece to be shading that bottom piece. So you're actually not going to have good light conditions on the whole plant. So the correct way is actually to make your base wider and your top smaller. So that way you have good light quantity hitting all of that shrub and hedge properly. So we talked about kind of light quantity, light quality, and it's always right plant, right place. So here's some definitions and some kind of time frames for you to kind of think about when you're looking at light within your landscape. So full sun is at least 6 hours of direct sunlight between 9 and 4 during the day. Light shade receives sunlight, but usually is blocked for 2 to 3 hours during the summer months. Part shade receives dapple sunlight through trees. Full shade, it may receive some reflected light from either plants or other structures or something, but is pretty much blocked. Really only shade tolerant plants under full shade. And then dense shade is very little indirect or reflected light at all. So under a very dense canopy, so think of a deep dark forest, or think someplace that's under an elevated deck or something, some structure that is definitely going to give you just a dark area. So a little bit of light quantity, right plant, right place, and this will give you some kind of ideas of what plant you need and how much light it will need to grow well for you. So the other thing that I want you just to kind of remember is that the light changes throughout the season. One of the things that I always recommend, especially for new homeowners, is to don't plant anything for the first year as you live in your landscape. Watch your landscape. Watch it move and look at this light and the shadows and all of that within your landscape. You know, keep a garden diary, keep a journal, take some pictures, and also remember, if you move in now and you're looking at the shade patterns here in March and April, February, March, April, and you're looking underneath some deciduous trees, just remember those shade patterns are definitely going to be different come July, August, September, when that tree is full of leaves. So just remember those kind of tips, and you will be able to definitely have great plant growth within your landscape when it comes to light. So we're going to move from light to temperature. Most plants have an optimum temperature growth rate. Most plants, it's between 50 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Temperature it can reduced temperatures can slow the growth of plants. We definitely see that, you know, in the fall when we're moving into the fall, when the days get shorter and the temperatures get a little bit cooler, plants aren't growing quite as vigorously. Extreme temperatures definitely make a difference within your plants. Chilling and freezing damage can happen. Thermal induced cell damage and death can happen with temperatures. Controlled environments, temperatures can be manipulated, um, and then you can also manipulate into the timings, because remember we talked about different needs for light. Some plants need different needs for temperatures to either flower or produce storage organs or that kind of stuff. So here is the USDA map. Um, this map has been developed to the United States. It shows kind of the plant hardiness across the country. These are the average lows that happens in those areas, and all the zones are divided by 10-degree increments. So from the top to the bottom, you're going down about 10 degrees per zone. And so the USDA has created this, and then horticulturists have come and they have identified the low temps of most trees, shrubs, woody plants, perennials. And then they have assigned where those plants will live in what zone. So this is our state. These are our zones. We have from zone 4A to 5B within our state. Most of us live in about the 4B, 5A area. Some of us are down into the 5B area. And you can see what the low temps are. So you can see that they are moving in that 10-degree increment. Most hardiness zones can be found on pretty much all plant labels. They're usually found in all your seed catalogs, plant catalogs online. So if you know what hardiness you live, then you definitely can find out whether or not that plant will survive in your area. Most plant tags and most seed catalogs and everything have a lot of environmental needs on those tags, and they tell you a lot of information about those plants and what environmental needs those plants have. So here's our next hands-on activity. So you have a map of the state, the plant hardiness zone map. So I want you to find where you live and what zone you live in. And then I want you to kind of go over this plant tag and kind of figure out what this plant needs environmentally to survive within your landscape and the zone that you happen to live in. So now that we've done that activity, we can all see plant tags, and those of you that have your seed catalogs and looking for plants online and stuff, definitely know that you can find a lot of that information on your plant tags and seed catalogs on what plant needs environmentally for each while you're buying it. So the next thing we're going to talk about are plant responses to temperatures. So the first one we're going to look at is dormancy. This is a condition where buds and seeds are inhibited from growing until certain environmental conditions are met. So the plant needs these environmental conditions to usually break dormancy. It's usually what we think of. As you can see in this twig ID eVenture nature detective picture that I have up here, these are all twigs. They have all their buds, and these buds are in their dormant stage. Actually, a very good way to go and teach kiddos plant ID is to teach them what they look like in the winter. This is a fun little game if you wanted to play this, but just to look at this, this is what our plants right now are looking like. And those environmental conditions need to be met in order for those buds to start breaking dormancy. One of the things that's going to happen is the days are going to get longer, so the light is going to get longer. Temperatures are going to start to warm up, and those buds are going to start breaking dormancy. To go into dormancy, then it's the complete opposite. The days are going to get shorter, the days are going to get cooler, and that plant is just going to know that it needs to start going into reverse and start going into a dormant stage. So one of the things that plants also need to break this bud dormancy is what they call chilling hours. So a lot of plants have to be in a cold environment for so long before they can break that bud dormancy. For example, most apples need to be between 800 and 1100 hours of chilling hours in order for those buds to start breaking dormancy. While there's this rabbit eye blueberry that you can grow further south, that really only needs 400 to 700 hours of chill time in order for those buds to break dormancy. So one of the things that you have to remember though, and we've seen this here in Nebraska quite frequently over the past several winters, is that they will hit that chill time and then we will warm up quite quickly. And those buds will start breaking and opening, and then all of a sudden we'll get a late freeze or a late frost and can get some damage on that tender growth. So just you have to remember those kinds of things. Not a lot you can do about it, but just have to remember that that can happen. Plants respond to stress and temperatures. There are a few stresses when it comes to temperatures: chilling injury, freezing injury, sun scald, heat stress. Here's some examples of some of those things. Sun scald or heat stress on a pepper. Somehow a branch broke or some leaves fell off or something happened that exposed that fruit to the sunlight, and this is sun scald on a pepper. We just talked about the bud dormancy and opening, break that bud breaking early. Here's some late frost damage on a forsythia. That's what that would look like. And then we have some very tender annuals here that even just a little bit of cool air on them can definitely hurt them. So this is a chilling injury. So it didn't freeze. The cells did not freeze within that plant on this basil, but it was exposed to a lower temperature and it has ruined both the look and the taste of that plant on that surface. We also have some heat stress on plants. I don't have a picture of that, but that's when plants are exposed to high temps for an exposed amount of time. Sometimes you can see some death from that, wilting, those kinds of things. So definitely temperatures and plants respond back and forth, and you can have some stress on plants when it comes to temperature. So when you're growing plants in certain areas, we do have what they call hardening off. A lot of you probably have done this with your vegetables. If you start them from seed in your house, you're going to harden off those plants. So you're going to allow these plants to acclimate themselves from one environment to another. Plants that live outside do this naturally. As our seasons progress, they slowly warm up, slowly cool down, and those plants are naturally hardening off. But you can do that with your annuals. As you can see here, we were hardening off plants that were going into the backyard farmer garden. Vernalization, that is the response of cooling temperatures to plants to stimulate flowering. A lot of biennials do this, celery, onions, hollyhocks. A lot of commercial settings do this to force plants into a flowering mode. So they'll lower the temperature in order for them to flower when they want them to. Sometimes it works right. Sometimes you can have it not work right. A lot of times we have onion sets sold. Those onion sets are usually stored at a cooler temperature. They're planted out into the field. They're exposed then again to some heat and then some cold. And then that kind of screws them up for the vernalization. And then it actually flips them around so that it will actually create or force that onion to start flowering, other than creating a bulb, which is usually what you want when you're growing onions. So just remember, temperature does have effects on both flowering and organ storage. So there's a thermal period, which is the relationship between days and nights and temperatures. Thermal period results with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis usually always exceeds respiration to create good growth. And that's the plant. And if respiration is more than photosynthesis, then the plant's actually spending more time breaking down all that extra energy and is not in growing in an optimum way. So maximum growth occurs when temps are about 15 degrees higher during the day than at night. So if this is met, the plant will grow tall and have good elongation of the internodes. If this is not met, then the plant can remain shorter and more compact and may not create the desired organs or fruit that you want it to be. You also have to remember that we're not only looking at air temperatures, we're also looking at soil temperatures. And soil temperatures play a very key role in seed germination, root growth, water uptake, and disease susceptibility when it comes to plants. So optimum soil temperature definitely depends on the crops. If you're looking at a cool season crop, they will take lower soil temps, but the max soil temp is usually about 77 degrees. So they really don't like soil temps much more than 77 degrees. Warm season generally prefer warmer soils. So usually when you're looking at warm season plants, you're not putting them out in the soil until the temperature of the soil is at least 55 to 60 degrees. So if the temps are too cool for a seed, they basically can just kind of sit there. Little or reduced germination. They may become more susceptible to cold temperature damage or disease. And the root growth responds almost exactly the same as the seed growth. If it's too cool, they're just kind of gonna sit there. If it's a seed and it's a wet area, you could get diseases in there, and you could get crown rot or death of that plant. If a soil temp is too high or too low, then growth is diminished, like I just said. And then much of the plant's responses to the temperatures in the soil and the air are definitely dependent on what that species is. So you can manage temps very easily in your landscape. You can have good site selection. You can have season extenders. Usually in commercial areas, you're looking at some overhead irrigation can definitely manage temps. You can do some localized heating in commercial areas, and then commercial areas also use wind machines to manage their temperatures. Here's some examples of some managed temperatures. We have a hot camp. We have our little low tunnel. We did some soil sterilization in the garden one year. And then, so you can definitely manage temperatures within your landscape. So when you're looking at temperature and you're looking at site selection, you're looking at air drainage, the orientation of your slope in your landscape, the altitude, And then you're also looking at large bodies of water can definitely influence the temperature in your landscape. So let's look at a couple of these things. So cold air is heavier than warm air and it will travel downhill. So if you have a hilly area, remember that especially in the spring or summer, that cooler air is going to kind of bottom out in those lower areas. Warmer air is less dense and it's going to move up that hill through convection. Air drainage is what we kind of talked about. So this is the process where the cold air sinks downhill to the lowest available point, and then it accumulates until dispersed by heat or wind. Making sure that you have your crops orientated correctly will definitely help with this. Vineyards take very good advantage of the geography by planting on higher points with a slight to moderate slope. They encourage the cold air to move out and then allows that warmer air to kind of filter back up to the top. The low-lying areas that are accumulating that cold air can cause freezing or chilling injury to plants that are in those areas. A lot of times those people people call those low areas frost pockets. So just remember, if you have, an acreage or something and you kind of have some hilly areas when you're planting, make sure that you know what plants you're planting. And like we looked at the plant tags, know what those plants can take and what environmental conditions when you're planting them in areas. So we talked about microclimates a little bit ago when we were talking about weather and climate, but just to kind of go over them a little bit more. So microclimates are localized areas with temperature differences, and they can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what crop you have. You may sometimes be able to manipulate your landscape so that maybe you have a plant that is one hardiness zone further south survive if you have the right microclimate condition. So if you're looking at trying to grow that crepe myrtle that you just saw that you just can't live without, sometimes you can manipulate and have a microclimate to accommodate the condition of that plant. Or you may have problem with the plant surviving, such as in a hill strip. So you have two sides of a small area that's surrounded by concrete. It's got radiant light coming off of this heat stress concrete surfaces. And so you have created this microclimate that just really is not accommodating any plants or very few plants. So definitely make sure that you understand where some microclimates could be within your landscape. We talked a little bit about slope orientation when we were talking about it just a little bit ago with the planting of the grapes on slopes. But slope orientation is the landscape with a hilly land, and it should definitely be considered when you're planting. A couple of thought processes when you're looking at this. The slope orientation definitely refers to what side of slope that faces, so north, south, west, east. In cooler climates, growers plant on the south facing to maximize light exposure and the heat. So if you're looking at maximizing heat and maximizing sun, you definitely want to plant your stuff on the south. Northeastern and northeastern slopes are preferred in climates with warm or hot summers and cold winters. So what you can do to manipulate this is the locations can reduce the damage caused by rapid heating and cooling. So the high heat or warming up too fast and cooling down too fast definitely will be reduced on those sides. So you're warming up a little bit slower. You're going to have less problems with bark splitting, trunk injury, or early bud break when you are slowing down that increase in seasons and warming up through planting on a hilly side and using that slope orientation to your benefit. So we talked about water a little bit ago, and bodies of water can manipulate, and commercial growers use this quite a bit in irrigation. But if you have a body of water by you, it definitely does moderate the temperature in the surrounding of your land. You can moderate temperature with season extenders, covering a crop with protective barriers, plastic, fabric, glass. Definitely extends the season by increasing the temps earlier and later in the season. Some of the smaller things that we've used within gardens, especially for the home garden, are those walls of water. You have floating row covers, heat caps, milk jugs, cold frames. Those are all things that lots of home gardeners see in their landscape and use to manipulate and have season extenders. There are high and low tunnels that are more sophisticated for extending your season. So low tunnels provide a way to keep plants from freezing during cold temperatures. A lot of people put low tunnels on their raised beds and extend their season into the fall or start their season a little bit earlier in the spring. High tunnels are unheated structures that extend the growing season by creating warmer production environments late into the fall and early into the spring. As you can see, this is a high tunnel. You can manipulate it. Remember, we talked about putting shade cloth on it. You can actually make it a little bit shadier and keep it a little bit cooler in there in the summertime by putting shade cloth over the top. A lot of them, the sides roll up so you can get the wind and stuff through there and air circulation through there. But then when it gets cooler in the evening, you can roll them down and keep that warmth inside there. So definitely ways to be able to extend your season in your growing environment in your landscape. These are commercial products, mainly localized heating and wind machines. If there's going to be an early frost and you've already had bud break, there are machines that you can go and light up and heat that area so you have less damage from a frost. And then there are wind machines that kind of help circulate the air so that you don't have the hot air, you're circulating or mixing that high hot air that's moving in the low cold air so that you don't have all those pockets or frost pockets like we talked about. So usually not used in the home landscape, but used in a commercial landscape. There are benefits to wind. We use wind, and will help mix the air. So that is the natural way of mixing, like in those commercial landscapes that we saw earlier. Wind benefits us by cooling the outdoor environment also. Wind benefits us by drying the leaf surfaces off. Water helps aid in disease. So the better wind benefits and wind circulation that we have, the better leaf drying we have, usually the less diseases we have. Wind also benefits us by pollination. There are a lot of plants pollinated by wind. So definitely something that you need to look at when you're looking at weather and climate. So the last thing we're going to look at is water. Water makes up approximately 80 to 90% of most herbaceous plants. It is an essential part of the plant growth and development, and it drives most of the plant growth and development, and it is one of the ingredients that you need in photosynthesis. We're going to look at water drought and what water drought looks like. So water drought looks like a decrease in growth. The growth is usually going to slow. The leaf color is going to be usually off a little bit. It's usually the plant's going to decline from the top down. A lot of times if you have water drought, you're going to see early fall color. So if you have a tree that's turning its fall color in July, then definitely something that you need to start looking at as to what that cause may be. And then because the plant has so much water in it, if you do not have enough water, you definitely will see poor flowering and poor fruit production in that plant. If you have excess water, your your plant slows in growth again or stops completely. The water and nutrient uptake slows down. The leaves may wilt. Your roots will start rotting if it's sitting in too much water. Usually your soils will have kind of a rotten, sour smell. And a lot of times the interior leaves of your plant will become yellow. Just one thing to think about though, at the beginning, not enough and too much water, their symptoms mirror each other or mimic each other. So a lot of times you don't know for sure which one it will be. So that's definitely a way to get in there and stick that soil knife down into your soil and check it for too much or not enough water. So one of the last thing we're going to look at when we're coming to water and for the end of our talk today is the relative humidity in the air, which is water. It's the amount of water that the air can hold. The relative humidity decreases and the evaporation of that plant will increase. So the less humidity in your air, there are more evaporation is going to come off that plant. The plant or humidity increases from the western part of the state to the eastern part of the state. The western part of the state has less humidity than the eastern part of the state. And having too much humidity definitely will increase disease incidence. The plant is too wet. The plant is not able to dry off. We talked about wind helping to dry off the leaves of that plant. If you have too much humidity, that will also show too much disease and possibly create more disease within that plant. So that is the end of the talk for landscape in the environment. I hope this helped you kind of guide you into looking at your environment, maybe in your landscape in a little different way, to be able to understand what's happening in your landscape and to be able to have maximum growth of your plants in your landscape. So if you have any questions, please let us know, and we will see you next time. Thanks.